think once you get to terms with what you can do with these, you can come up with some incredible systems that can really have a huge impact in your school. Right, so first and foremost, I presented on Tuesday as well. I see most of you have attended the session. We've got lots of ones so far, so hopefully you should be familiar with my voice by now. E-learning advisor in the Cape Winelands district. One thing I will say is I'm very keen once people start using these systems and trying to come up with new concepts in their school. Please, you're more than welcome to contact me. If you get stuck somewhere, if you want some ideas, if you just want to bounce some plans off someone, you're more than welcome to contact me. I'm always curious to see how people end up using some of these things. It's great to see the innovation from our teacher side as well. So some house rules. Your cameras and your microphones have been automatically muted. We tend to not turn them on. We tend to prefer to let the training focus, let the training flow naturally. So if you've got questions, use the chat panel. I do monitor the chat panel as well. I'll try and see if there are questions there and answer them as they pop up. So yes, please make use of that. Then we're still focused on this concept of systemic change. The idea that we want to be able to use data visualization, digital reporting, and all of these things to bring about systemic change. So this is our focus of these sessions, is how do we build these tools and systems that can allow this systemic change to take place. Now, in the previous session that we had, we spoke about this concept that we end up running into, this issue we end up running into with people when they're entering information. We've got multiple responses. Just the name of a candidate can end up being 5. This is 5 different people that we are tracking. Now, if we've got a system like the one that we're working on, building a discipline tool for a school, it's not going to work if we're trying to track the disciplinary offenses of a learner and they are registered. This learner is registered as 5 different learners, because this doesn't reflect accurate data for me. So I need to figure out how I can actually move beyond that. And what we want to be doing, or what we're going to focus on in this session, at least in the beginning, is how we can use ID keys to try to make sure that we control the input. So today's session is largely focused on controlling the input that we receive, making sure that we can focus it and the data that we want clean data that we can actually is usable and workable. So that's going to be a real big focus at the start of our session, is being able to do that. Then this example that we see over here, we're going to look at a second way, and this is, I mean, in a way, the easiest way to control it really is by using things like drop downs and essentially limiting input. As far as possible, not having people type anything, but just having people select things. Now, in certain cases, that's possible. In certain cases, it's not. So we're gonna discuss the different types of input and when to use which type of input when we are building our forms, because that's an important part of how we do it. So we're essentially here at the same thing that we were doing last time. We're still focused on data-driven decisions. We want information on what's happening. And the more you start using these tools, the more you'll start learning about how you can get the data in, the more you'll start understanding data in itself and how to read and interpret data. And it's one of those things that snowballs. It builds on itself. Once the concepts are there, you just kind of realize how useful it is, and then you want to be able to have more options and more things in there. But so our ultimate goal remains the same, but today we're going to look at a lot about limiting and controlling the data input, because then we end up having workable and sensible data. Now, what we showed you last time, it's quite easy to control if there's one person who's typing in the names, and hopefully they're going to type it the same way. But again, you need to imagine the system scaling to the point where you've got all the teachers at your school, be it 10 teachers or 50 teachers at your school, using these forms and punching in information. And they're not going to do it in the same way unless you don't give them options to do it differently. So we have to make sure that we can limit and control the kind of input that we are receiving. Right? Then once we are able to limit and control data, and this is the part where things get complicated and incredibly powerful and useful, is when we start automating data capture using other data sets. So it's a very fancy way of really saying we're going to use one bit of information, data that we already have, and we combine it with something that someone else is giving us, and then build complete data sets based off of that. Now, before we can get to that point, obviously we're going to use the same tools that we used last time. We're going to use Google Forms for our data capturing because it's free and easy, and it integrates incredibly well with Google Sheets. So this is still going to be the fundamental building blocks of what we want to look at, because we are focused on this data manipulation and automation using Google Sheets. And that automation is a key thing that we want to get to today. But before we can get to that, just a little bit of theory in understanding how we do these things, because this is it's not a complicated thing, but it's an incredibly important and very much overlooked thing. The difference between the concept of bottom-up and top-down design. Now, with bottom-up design, what we end up doing, and this is a very, very, very common thing. Some people refer to just-in-time design, etc. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. But what we do is we build a Google form, which starts collecting data. That's what we do. That's step number one. We build our form without necessarily considering the Google Sheet that is supposed to be linked to it. Even less so, we consider what we could do potentially with something like a data studio, which is the sessions that you can attend next week. And then after we've got our form, then we start, and only then do we start looking at the data that I already have, the things that I had beforehand, and now the new information that I'm getting in, and I start seeing how I can bring these two together to create a comprehensive, more comprehensive set of information. But I only do that after I've built my form. And then I ask myself, okay, once I've combined all of these things, what does the data actually show me? What can I read from this data? What is it saying? And then lastly, we ask ourselves, so what is the information that I can actually get from this to make meaningful decisions? So essentially, we start with our Google form, and then from there, we kind of let the Google form and the things that the Google form gives us guide the rest of the process to the point where we are able to make the meaningful decisions, the data-driven decisions. Now, the top-down design obviously flips this whole thing on its head by starting with what is the information that I need. We first ask the questions, the question, if I want to make data-driven decisions, what would the data be that I'm supposed to, well, what are the questions I want to ask, and how would I be able to answer these questions? Then I start asking myself, so what is the data that I would need to actually visualize, illustrate, analyze, whatever you want to call it, the problem? And then you ask yourself, okay, so now I know what I want, what the kind of information is that I would need in order to make these meaningful decisions. So before we start collecting information, let's first see what do we actually have already? What's the information that we've got on record, so that I don't end up having unnecessary duplication that is happening, but that I'm actually using, having this kind of data integrity in the sense that things are the same. So, and you'll see now when we start working on the forms again, what I mean by that. And then the last thing is we build a Google form. So in terms of the practical side of things, the Google form is still going to be the first thing that you end up doing, right? So we'll end up building our Google form. That's what we do here. And the first practical thing that we'll end up doing is we will also end up building our Google form. That is the first step. The big difference between the process here is we've got a whole bunch of things that we think about and plan and consider before we build our form. Now, in the real world, it's not often that it ends up working like this, even though in many cases one could argue that this top-down design is a more sensible way of doing it. But we are often, we've got time constraints, we've got pressures that we need to consider. So we often just kind of build the form and let's get going with what happens. And in the practical world, what ends up happening is you kind of have something that's similar to this. You know what you want, the information that you need, and then you go and build a form. But we often skip, especially this step. What is the information that I already have, so that I don't needlessly duplicate what I'm doing? And it's important to understand that we're not saying that bottom-up design is bad and you should never do it. Not at all, because very often there's the practical, just in terms of the practicality, we don't always know what the data will be and the meaningful decisions that we want to be able to make before we've got the information. So in that practical sense, we often end up doing a kind of a bottom-up design approach rather than the top-down design. All that I'm trying to, the main message I'm trying to get across here, that I'm trying to convey is, if you spend a little bit more time thinking carefully about the whole system, trying to see the bigger picture before you start building the smaller moving parts, then you actually save a lot of time, because this part can be quite tricky if you didn't consider it beforehand. Long Google Forms that have to now have to incorporate a whole bunch of various scenarios can become quite complex and difficult to work with. Keeping your forms as simple and short as possible, it makes life easier in terms of building systems around them. Now, this isn't always possible, of course not. It really depends on the need, but that's something I can really advocate. If you can keep it simple, it's just much easier to work with. Simple yet powerful. We want bang for our buck. We want to have short forms and a lot of information based on those short forms. Right. So today we're going to do things a little bit differently, but we are actually really building on a lot of what we did last time. So this time we're going to spend a bit more time in the form and really just ask ourselves, so what are the types of questions that I should use? What is data validation, and how can I use data validation in the forms that I'm creating? And we already looked at this top-down design versus bottom-up design. And really, I have to stress, this is an important thing to understand, this concept of thinking carefully, especially if you're considering a system that is supposed to be scalable. Now, to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, some of the systems that we built, we never expected them to scale to the point where they have, which it's great to see that they are scaling to that point, but now you're starting to see, okay, but maybe we should have done this little element differently, or maybe we should have incorporated this, and et cetera, et cetera. And it can be quite challenging to have to rebuild some of these things. Some of our Google Forms are running in excess of 13,000 records by now. So it's great if you spend a little bit of time planning these things carefully. Now, this data integrity was kind of the thing that we were talking about in the beginning, about not having multiple entries, but trying to make sure that there's a correlation between our entries. And the cross-referencing thing, I think this is where Google Sheets, in my mind, just becomes an absolutely amazing tool, an incredibly powerful tool. And you'll see what I mean by that when we get there. And this links to that cross-referencing, the ability to import values from data sets and then use those to autocomplete data. I know lots of people were already hinting at the idea of VLOOKUP. If you are very confused when I say that, don't worry, we'll get there. That's going to be the, I suppose, more complicated part of today's session, is just wrapping your head around how the VLOOKUP works. And then, of course, something we want to look at is how do we actually control the access to the data? Because remember, this is a cloud-based thing. An Excel sheet on your computer is quite easy. Unless someone actually physically has your computer, they can't really access that. Cloud-based, not the same. Cloud-based, it is accessible, but you can control who has access to it. So that is, if you don't control it well, it can become quite dangerous. But if you do control it well, it's very, very useful having these sheets and control and access to them on a cloud-based platform. Right, so this is a practical session. I sincerely hope you've got your Google Chrome up open already. Just before we get going, I hope you all know where the reactions are. Can we just see a couple of thumbs and hearts and applauses? Some laughter would be good as well. There we go. Great stuff. Thank you very much. And use that throughout. If you find time to click on it, it just makes me feel that there's a little bit of interaction happening, that you're keeping up. Just be careful if you're going to press those buttons. The raise your hand button is a slightly different one, because then we're going to see you've got a hand raised. If you've got questions, please ask them throughout. I do monitor the chat, and I'll try and see what's going on there. If something happens a bit too quickly, you're welcome to say, please just repeat that, and we'll repeat that. We've got a lot of things we would like to get through, so with that said, let's get going. So the next slide, if you click on the copy of the form template, you'll see it is exactly the same form template. And the cheat sheet, it's exactly the same cheat sheet that we used in the previous sessions. So please click on those, open them up so that we can get going with with the Google form and get going with the various formulas. I'm just going to copy the links into the chat again for those of you that might have trouble clicking on the interactive PowerPoint. So there they are. They are the two links. Please use those and create your copy. I'm just going to leave this open for another second or two so that you can start making your copies. Remember, if you click on it, it's going to ask you make a copy of the document, discipline, form, grade X. In today's example, we're not actually going to do the grade X thing. You can just remove that once you've made your copy. Just change it to discipline form. Right, if you are ready to get going, some thumbs up. If you've made your copy, so you should click on this, make a copy. And there we go, there we have our copy. Okay. Right, so first let's talk about the form itself, and specifically, and this really is an important thing to keep in mind when you are designing and building forms, and that is, how can I limit the input that I have? So last time we looked at the learner name, learner surname, and combining these things, but now we're actually going to just do away with everything that you see in front of you. So we are really kind of interested in this last part, because we want to be able to link the offense and the description of that offense to a learner, and we want to actually just get rid of things here. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take one of them. I'm not going to delete the question. I'm just going to change learner name to the question ID key. Right? Learner surname, I can just delete. Let's just get rid of learner surname. Class, I can actually delete as well. And now I'm going to talk about some of the question types. So after ID key, I'm going to add one more question, because we want to define the teacher. And there are two ways of doing this that I'll show you now that actually works quite well. But for the most part, I think most of you will only really have access to the one option that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to say add question. And this question, I want to say, I'm going to make this question teacher. Now, when I make the question teacher, When we looked at our form last time, we had it as short answer and I could type the teacher's name. The problem is when we're going to build a system, we want to actually group certain things according to teacher. We want to filter it according to teacher or sort according to the teacher, whatever the case might be. But we need to control the input here because one person will write Mr. van Niekerk, the next one will just write van Niekerk. The rest one will write my full name, Jaco van Niekerk. So while you are the teacher, so you are likely to always type your name in a similar way, on Tuesday, I showed you what happens that when I accidentally hit the caps lock key as well, suddenly it captures it at someone else. That's the one thing. Then the second thing, I want to make this form as quick and easy to use as possible. Now, you can imagine if you're in a classroom and you just want to register something that went wrong in your class, you don't want to have to go and type out your name. It's much easier if you can just select. So for that reason, when I do this, there are 3 key options that allows you to limit the input into a Google form. The multiple choice option, the checkboxes, and the drop down. Now, a lot of people often ask, when should I use which one? So multiple choice, I always recommend if you're going to have, I personally feel a maximum of 5 choices, then multiple choice is quite nice. The nice thing about multiple choice is if I select multiple choice, I'm just going to quickly copy, I'm just going to add an example of teachers here. So we'll add these. And one of the nice things about Google Forms and multiple choice things, just remember that the minute that you, sorry, let me just fix that. The minute that you actually have a list somewhere already in an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet or a Word document, as long as the names are and all these things are in a new line, you can literally just copy and paste it, and it'll paste each option into a new option. So multiple choice would be a sensible thing to use when I've got only these 4 names. What's nice about using the radial box, or using this option rather than the drop down, is it immediately displays all of the options when I open up the Google form. So I don't have to click on the drop box and look for the name and then select the name. I open it, I see all 4 names, and I just click, and that's great. It's easier to get to that point. A word of warning, because a lot of people tend to select check boxes. This is something I picked up quite often, is people use check boxes. Now, the difference between the checkbox and the multiple choice, the checkbox allows you to tick more than one option. Just keep in mind when you've got more than one, the option to select more than one option, it becomes significantly more tricky to manage this in terms of an automated system. It's not impossible, but it definitely goes beyond what we are doing today. It becomes quite tricky to do that. When you're looking, and I know people sometimes use these 2, I can tell you now, multiple choice grids and checkbox grids are a nightmare to use when automating systems. It can be done, but it really is a nightmare. The 2 main ones you want to use really are multiple choice and drop downs. Drop down for a long list, multiple choice for a short list. And there's also a limit to the drop down. I'm sure everyone in this session has by now engaged with lots of different Google Forms in the past, and they will know what it feels like if there's 700 or 800 names on a drop down. It can be quite frustrating, and please, as far as possible, make those alphabetical. It just makes life a lot easier for people. So in this instance, we're just going to keep it as a drop down. I know for 4 I would normally use a radial box, but for now we're going to make a drop down. So we've now got literally four questions in our whole form. We've got an ID key, we've got a teacher, we've got an offense, and we've got a description. And that's it. So the description we're going to leave as is, because this allows for a little bit of information to be put in. But I'm just going to show you a useful thing here with data validation that you can do. So if you've selected any of your questions, when you click on the 3 dots, it's kind of like a right-click option. It gives you this option to add description, of course, but more importantly, response validation. So with response validation, if you're using a paragraph option, you'll see I can give them a minimum number of characters, or, well, we're probably rather going to use a maximum character count. Now, you can figure out what this has to be, but this kind of limits teachers from writing this long-worded essay on what's happened. But maybe you want to allow them to write as much as they want to. Then we just take that away by clicking on that X. But for this instance, I don't want them to get too long-winded. I'm going to allow them to write 100 characters. Please note, it's 100 characters, not 100 words. You can't specify the number of words, only the number of characters. So go do a quick check and figure out how many words 100 characters would roughly be, and that gives you an idea of how long this can be. What I want to look at is our ID key. Now, an ID key is simply a way of saying every learner that we're going to be registering this offense for has a unique identifier, something that is unique to them. For example, in South Africa, we've all got an ID number, which is a unique identifier for every excuse me, citizen in the country. And then we've, as within the WCED, we've got the parcel numbers. So that one is again used to identify you as an employee. Learners have CMIS numbers. Now, on the CMIS numbers, you can of course use the CMIS number as an ID key in your school, but they're quite long, and the aim of this whole thing is to make a short thing to enter, something that's not going to be long-winded, that's going to be quick and easy to capture. So we want to find a nice short ID key. Now, for the purpose of this training, we're going to use, there are 10 ID keys that are going to be active because we're going to import data using it. And we're going to use what we call an alphanumeric ID key. An alphanumeric, in other words, it's got letters and numbers. I really recommend using alphanumeric number keys rather than just numbers, for the simple reason that an alphanumeric number key, you know that it's easier to match up with other things. If it's just a number, sometimes it gets taken over and they think it's actually text and it's not a number, and then you have to convert it into a number again. Other times you have to convert the number into text, and it can just become a bit sloppy. So I like using alphanumeric keys. This is something I only recently started doing, since running into lots of headaches with just plain number keys. So let's have a look at how we can do that. Now, last time we tried to do it, I know it bombed out. I'm just going to check if it doesn't do it this time. The easiest way to do this ID key is to limit the response is just by going to length and saying, look, our ID keys are going to be a maximum of 3 characters. Because our ID keys are typically going to be A01 or A02 or A03. So that allows me quite a variety, because remember, I can go A, B, C, D. So there's lots of different options there. So the ones that we're going to be using are A01 to A10. Excuse me. So there I've got my simple validation set up. But this can be quite complicated once you start understanding the regular expression. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but the one that I want to show you is I can have a pattern, for example, where I do something like this. 0 to 9. Okay. Let's see. I don't know why something funny is going on with the ID keys recently. For that, so yes, it did the same thing last time. Not sure why something is broken with the regular expression. So if that doesn't work, we just stick to the length one. This is the simplest way to do it, right? But you can get very, very, very specific and finicky once you start using this regular expression to define the kind of the pattern that the ID key has to follow. But for the most part, what I've found is if you've just got this set up and you limit it to 3, because you know all ID keys are going to be like that, it's going to make sure you essentially just want to make sure that people aren't actually typing out the learner's name. And this is only an issue when they start using the system the first time round. So there we go. We've got our ID key. We've got a limit set up. Everything is good to go on our form. We are happy. We've given it some thought. And now we're going to go and copy it to a Google Sheet, right? So I'm just going to take that away because we're actually only going to have one discipline form now. And to copy it to the Google Sheet, we click on responses, and there's the create spreadsheet, and we'll do that, and we're going to link it to, we're going to create a new spreadsheet. I'm just going to call it example again. Right. So there's my Google Sheet. Right. So it is an incredibly short form now. I've literally got 4 questions on my entire form. That's it. Now I want you to get to this point and then just go and capture 1 or 2 go and capture the form once or twice. I'm just going to type in the chat again. I see there's quite a few people who've joined us a little bit later. I hope you are able to get up to date with where we are. So in the chat, you'll see those can be the ID keys, A01, A1, all the way up to A10. So just go and capture a couple of examples of so that you've got something to work with in your Google Sheet so long. I'm going to do the same thing, and just make sure that I've also got 1 or 2 things to work with. Remember, a nifty little trick I showed you this last time. If you've got a form linked to a Google Sheet, you can simply go to form, and you can go to live form, edit form, send form, whatever. I want to go to the live form, and I'm just going to go capture a few examples here on the side. Once you've got 1 or 2 in, you can just tell me, I've got my few examples in. Right there, you'll see there's my first example. Right, I just wanted to capture 2 examples. I'm just going to pause there for a second so that everyone gets to this point. Right, if you are at this point and you want to plot along, so keep yourself busy. See if you can add the auto numbering that we did last time. And if you want to challenge yourself, try and do it without just going to the cheat sheet and copying the formula. See if you can remember how to do it. I'm going to do it slowly over here. Right. I see Lucinda is caught up. Okay, so if you've got your sheet open, I'm just going to go capture another example quickly. If you've got your Google form here, you can go to the preview mode. You can either do it like that. If you click on the eye, it's going to open up a fillable Google form. Alternatively, you can click on form and go to live form. Right, so if I go to my live form, this is what my form actually looks like. Very short and very easy. Remember our ID keys. Please use the same ID keys, otherwise some of the other formulas that we're just going to copy and paste won't work. And we're just going to have that. We'll choose our teacher, and we're just going to say next. Select something that they did. They were late. Right, and we'll submit. Okay, and then I've submitted it. Once I've submitted it, there we go. There the entry, you can see the entries over there. Okay, I hope I'm still with you. So there was a slight dip in my connection there for a second. Okay, so right, we'll get to the numbering in a second again. Now, the problem is what we're going to end up with here is we want to be able to figure out what's going on, but no one is going to expect you to remember who A01 is. So we're going to have to try and add some information into the sheet to make it more usable than it is at the moment. Because as things stand, I can't really do much with something that is A01. Right, so now with a number column, I'm gonna show you again how that works. With a number column, we use that array formula, right? So I just want to close this one quickly. Right, so if we go to our formula cheat sheet, if you don't want to go and figure out how the thing works, there is the formula for you. You can copy and paste that into column 1. I'm going to go into this because, yes, let's just go into this quickly. Because we need to discuss the array formula again, just so that everyone is on board with what's happening. So there are little parts to this row, to that formula that we use. And this gets pasted into cell A1, by the way. So there's a formula over there. And I know it says A, it's supposed to say B. I just keep on forgetting to change it. But the row function, if I run it as row A2, it will return the row number of cell A2, which is going to be 2. But I've wrapped it in an array formula, so now I can give it a range. In other words, I can tell it, run the formula on cell A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, A7, and every time it's going to return the row number that I'm asking for. The reason why I say -1 is because our auto numbers actually start in row 2, not in row 1. That's why I have to have the -1. Right, the link to the cheat sheet, I'm going to give you that quickly. There's the link to the cheat sheet. Okay, so that's going to generate the rows. I use this if A2 to A is not blank. Technically, I do the B2 to B is not blank, in order to see if there's any information in column B. Then I'm going to create an auto number. If there's nothing in column B, so let me show this if function. So I'll check if there's anything in column B, then I'll run the row. If there's not, then I'm going to print something that's blank, something that's not there. So that's what that does. And then we use this little wrapper around here with the curly brackets to explain, or just to give myself a column header. Remember, the curly brackets is when we create our arrays. Okay, we can't spend too much time on this because these are things we focused on last time. So we have to, if you struggle with it, luckily the cheat sheet is there. You can copy that, and you can just go to this. And just make sure when you paste things, don't just paste them. Click on in the formula tab. It's a more surefire way to work. Click there, paste it, and then enter, and you'll have your auto row numbers set up for you. Okay, so now we're going to get to the really, I think, possibly the best and the most important part of what you can do with Google Sheets, what makes it such a great tool, and that is the ability to import data. Now, importing data means I'm going to be able to take information from a different Google Sheet, not just copying information from one tab to another tab, but actually getting information from an entirely different Google Sheet. Now, let's have a look at how we actually do that. So if I'm going to open up a new tab. I'm going to call this tab name list, right? Because I now need a list of names. Here I've only got ID keys, but who on earth are these people? I want to create a name list for them here. And you don't have to go and create your own name list. You're going to import a name list. So if we go to the cheat sheet, the one we're looking for is formula number 4. Just select that, copy it, and paste it. Right? If you do that, copy and paste, just at the top, and you say enter, you'll see they've got a list of names that's been imported. Now, let's explain how that actually works, why it works the way that it does work. What you see over here, this is the formula itself. Let me just zoom in a little bit still. Right, so this is the formula, import range. How the import range works, are other people also experiencing some audio issues? Okay, all right, so if the audio is breaking up on your, it must be something about your end that the internet is struggling a little bit. Okay, so the import range, what happens here is we've got 2 parameters that we're going to define. The one parameter is the spreadsheet URL, and the second one is the range string. So let's first talk about the spreadsheet URL. Now, the way that any Google file works, it's all cloud-based, and they've all got a URL link to it. So the URL is just the link to that Google Sheet. So you'll see here at the top, I'm going to copy this one for you quickly so you can see what it looks like. This is the URL of this Google Sheet, this long thing that you see over there, right? Now, I can use this as well. It's important to note, I can use that whole long thing and it'll work perfectly fine as my spreadsheet URL. And this allows me to import information from a different Google Sheet. Now, the one thing that I've found, and this is not essential, but the one thing that I've found is that with the import range, it is, especially once your system becomes quite big, it works better if you actually only use, I don't exactly know what they call it, but I'd like to call it the ID key of that sheet. So in other words, if we look at this long URL over here, there are parts of it that are not part of the ID key. Essentially, everything here in front, that part is not part of the specific sheet's ID key. So I can take that part away. And here at the back, I can select all of that and I can take that away. Now, just be careful when you're doing that, because the minute I take away one extra letter, suddenly it won't work because it won't be able to find that sheet. So make sure that you use exactly that ID key. But when you are first kind of getting used to it, the first time you do it, it's actually easier rather than using that. You can see that I've used only that, is to use the long one. So if I were to replace that, for example, with this and just add that part in front, it will still work because that is part of the long. Let's get to the files. Let's have a look at what the file actually looks like, where we are importing our information from. So I'm going to copy that quickly. I'll open a new tab. I'll just paste it, and there we go. So this is the, all right, so this is the actual file that we are importing information from that you see in front of you. This is the stuff that we are using to import information to our different sheet from sample B and then names. Now, how I do this here. Okay, so how I do this over here, actually, there are two parts to this. The first part I use is the spreadsheet URL, which is the link to the actual to that actual sheet. And then the second part is the range string. Now, what I've done, and this is a tip I can give you because it just makes life a lot easier. I've used a named range. Now, if you have never used these before, it makes formulas a lot easier if you're going to have ranges. You can simply go to this form response. Just to show you something quickly here, I can go and I can select this part. This is now my named range, and then right click on it, and we actually say define named range. So once you've selected something, I say defined, and I'm going to call this input data, and it's now going to know, okay, so input data is now a range. So I would technically be able to, if I'm using my curly brackets, I'd be able to go do something like this, input, and it will tell me, it's going to find that in here, input data, close, and it'll actually import that for me because I've defined a named range. Now, named ranges are incredibly useful when it comes to doing this import range. Because with this import range, what happens here is this becomes quite tricky because unlike what we normally do when we're defining formulas, is we can kind of click on different fields and Google Sheets will know where it is. If you are importing across multiple sheets, it won't be able to do that. So there we go. So if you don't do that, we're going to have to, for example, know what the range is. Now, what I mean by that is on this end, we're going to actually have to go and say names, exclamation mark, A1 to, I think it would be D11. And then I'll get the same thing. But all that I've actually done is because I've used that name range, because I've done that, names A1 to D11, I've defined that as a named range. Right. Just something with regards, I see guest is having trouble. If the sound is breaking up and if you're being thrown out of the session, it's more than likely an issue on your end with your connectivity that you're struggling with at the moment. So you're welcome to try and come in again, but there will luckily be recordings that you can review if the internet doesn't stabilize for you. So now that I've got this name range, or now that I've got this import data, I hope you've all been able to just copy and paste this link quickly. I've got my name list set up. There it is. Now I've got information, but now this information is still only sitting here. I don't want to go to form responses and go and copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. That's going to take forever to do that. Right, so what I want to do now is I'm just going to add an extra, I'm going to add a field over here, or a column next to ID key. Let's go insert one left. And there we've got a new column that we can use for our learner names. Let's call it learner names. So I'm not going to go copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. So what I'll use is what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a function called VLOOKUP. And I know some people mentioned the VLOOKUP thing. So it really is a useful thing to use, the VLOOKUP tool. What we can do is we can match a certain cell with a different with information somewhere else. So let me show you quickly with a formula cheat sheet. This is where I have the VLOOKUP. I'm going to go into the formula breakdown, which is going to explain the thing for you, and then we'll do it bit by bit. So if you're going to copy and paste this should probably work for you now. But we're going to go into a little bit more detail why it works. So this is our formula. It looks a lot more intimidating than it actually is once you've wrapped your head around it. The nice thing is there are parts of this that hopefully by now you understand. I'll explain this if error in a minute, but hopefully by now you kind of getting the whole what the array formula does and what this top bit does, so that you can start putting these things together. But now we need to look at what the VLOOKUP does. So VLOOKUP has 4 different parameters that you're going to be using. The first one is the value that it's supposed to look for. So in other words, what is the value that it wants to look for? Then you define the range where it's going to be looking for that value. And then you define the column that it's going to return when you start looking for that value, right? And the last bit, just leave it false. I'm not going to, I know some people mentioned a few complicated explanations last time why, but for the most part, I can tell you now, I have almost never needed to change that last parameter to true. So it's really something that you don't, just leave it as false. Rather fewer questions that way, right? So this little if error, all that I do is I use the if error function. I wrap the VLOOKUP in an if error function, because what happens is I don't want there to be lots of hashtag NA or hashtag value or whatever the error might be returned if it can't find something. If it doesn't find something, it needs to be blank, for the simple reason that if my range is long and there's nothing there, I want it to be blank. I don't actually want it to show anything. That's why I've got my if error formula, and then the rest of it, that's the normal array formula, and that's the normal header formula that we used. So now that we have a bit of an understanding of that, before we copy it, I'm just going to go and explain it to you over here. So we're going to use the VLOOKUP function first and foremost. VLOOKUP. Now it shows us there's the search key, there's the range, there's the index, and then the last one we're just going to type false. So the search key we want to use, we want to go and look for this A01, right? That is what we're looking for. We are going to go look for it in this range. So we're going to go find A01 wherever we can find it. And if we find it, we want to have a look at the second column, which is going to be the name column. So let me just take that away. So this is the second column. Now it's important to note your ID key that you're looking for has to be the first column. So your ID key always has to be in the first column, and then everything else that you're looking for is after that. And this can be a very long range if you want it to. So just to explain, we are looking for C2, which is going to be C2 is this value. We have defined the range that we're looking for it. And then lastly, what we've done is we've specified the column. Now I'm just going to add the false to the back of this, because that kind of, it has to do with is this whole thing indexed or not? And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's matched, sometimes it's not. It's just easier to leave it false. And as usual, Google Forms will give me the option, or Google Sheets will give me the option to autocomplete. But based on what we did last time, you'll remember if I'm going to submit new values, my formula will not run on to the next line. It's not going to go any further. But I just want to show you why we're going to use an if. Oh, we'll get to that now. So this is great if I know that I've only got 50 entries, but if I'm going to have this thing running endlessly, I need to have this formula completed as new information is coming in. The same way that I did over here. So let's just delete those because we're not going to use it. We want to use that formula. That's the one we're going to use. Let's take that out there and let's go over here. Now we're going to start learner names is going to be our, right. So learner names is our going to be the column title. We add a semicolon so that the next value goes on to the next row. Now we're going to add the array formula. We take this thing and we're going to wrap it in an array formula. We close it, sorry, and we need to close our curly bracket as well. Now the problem is what's happening now is you'll see it only completes the first one because I haven't specified a range yet. I've only told it to go run up to C2. Now, something we didn't discuss on Tuesday, just a little tip that I've found works quite nicely is rather than just having it run to the bottom of your sheet, have it run to your last entry plus 1, right? Sorry, so C2 to C5. So you're going to have it run to the last entry plus 1. The reason why we do that, and now you're going to see how that error pops up. The reason why we do that is, remember, Google Sheets will go and insert a new row. So if we go and insert one above, the formula automatically expands to accommodate the extra stuff that's been inserted. So it just works better that you're not running formulas unnecessarily. It runs up to the last entry that you've got plus 1. And now we just need to add that if error, and you'll see what the if error function is going to do. So I'll add this if error, and I'm just going to wrap this whole thing in an if error. Close it up, enter, and you'll see there it goes away. Right, so I've got my learner names, but now if I look at my name list, I can actually, because I'm using this ID key, I can get those things as well. I can get my class and I can get my grade, all from just using my ID key. And that makes sure that the learners we don't have to choose the grade or whatever the learner is in. It is automatically defined just by the ID key. So there I've got my learner names. I'm just going to add 2 more columns quickly. And this column is going to be, let's do it in the same order. Actually, what we do now, and I want to show you another little trick that works quite well. When we're going to copy this formula, if you're just going to drag it across, what it does is it changes the C, it'll change to a D, and this A to D is going to change from B to E, and technically it will look like it is working because I've got so few things. So you'll see it actually looks like it works, but technically it's not working. So it's better when you're doing things like that to copy your formula from the formula tab and then go and paste it in the formula tab again. And all that I do now is I change that 2 to a 3. Learner names changes to class. And then the F, I do the same thing. I'll change that to a 4. And learner names changes to grade. Right, now I'm going to pause and give you some time to try and get your sheet to look like this. If your sheet looks like this, please give me a thumbs up, an indication that you're still keeping up. For those of you who joined us a little bit late, I hope you were able to get caught up. If you weren't able to get caught up, again, there will be recordings. The recordings are only shared when the whole spreadsheet series finishes. So in other words, not next week, but the week after that. If you've registered and you've used the correct your correct email there, you will receive an email with all of the recordings and a very useful pack of a resource pack with shorter videos explaining these different concepts as well. Right, Lucia, I've given you the option to unmute if you want to ask the question quickly. I see there's a hand raised. The register has been pasted in the chat, so you can. Right. Okay, so let me show the whole process again. I'm just going to take these away and show you how you can use the cheat sheet to, well, cheat. So if you've got the formula cheat sheet over here, you can actually take this formula 6, copy that because it includes everything that we want to use. Copy that, go here, and we'll paste it in column E, right? Because what we've done now Let me just take some away some of these extra unnecessary white spaces. So all we need to do is we need to adjust one or two things in this formula. This one we changed that we're not referring to column 3 anymore or column 2 anymore. We want to refer to column 3. Right, so there it is. It's column 3. And then it's going to go and find that bit. Just so you understand, it still says learner name because I need to change that at the top. But just so you understand why it does that, we are still looking at column C. We're looking at column C, and we're using the ID keys that we see over here, and we're trying to match them. You'll see there's name list. So if your tab is not called name list, this won't work. So you need to make sure that your tab that you've used to import the names is called name list. So now it goes and it looks at this range. It's going to run through all of this, and when it finds a 0, 1, instead of printing anything else, it's going to see, okay, in column 2 it says Lolita Olmsted, so that's what the information I'm returning. Now we've just changed it from column 2, we've changed it to column 3. And we can use the exact same formula over here, and we'll just change the 2 to a 4 so that it's referring to the next one. And to change the headers, you just change this part here at the top. We'll change that to class, and we'll change that to grade. So one thing that's important here that you have to understand is how quickly and how easily, if you can remember our form, we can get this information. Right, Fani, were you able to follow this time? Okay, great. Now, another little trick I want to show you quickly. Let's open up a new sheet. We're going to call this imported. Right, so there's a new sheet called imported. Now, if we go to a formula cheat sheet, we're going to use number 5. Right, so here we're going to use formula number 5. You can copy and paste it quickly. Copy there, go over here, paste over there, and it'll import this information. Now, something I want to just mention, when you're trying to import from one range to the next range, or from one sheet to another sheet, you are going to have to make sure that both sheets is right. We're going to have to make sure that both sheets, or that you've got actually have access to that sheet, right? So if you don't have access to that sheet, it'll just say you don't have permission to import information from that sheet. Obviously, because that has to do with you can't just go and find information that you don't have access to and privilege to allow. So you have to make sure that you've got that access. If you have that access, the first time when you use this import range thing, the information won't just pop up. So if I do that, you'll see there's a little loading icon there, and that's going to add a little element there that says allow permission. Now you won't see that now because I am the owner of that sheet, and I've already allowed everyone the permission to use it to import the data the way that I've done here, by making sure that everyone has viewing rights and access rights to that sheet. So if you've got viewing rights on a sheet, you can import data from that sheet rather than copying and pasting that information. I'm going to get to that in a minute because it's an important thing to consider. Or let me explain that now. Best practice, an ideal thing, and this is something I always wanted to implement at my school, but was never really quite able to get that kind of buy-in, but it really does help a lot. If you want to make sure that you've got complete reliability across your different systems in terms of names, etc., it's such a useful thing to have one master list of names of learners in your school. And anything that needs to use those names, rather than copying and pasting things, just imports that data from there. Why this is so cool is you can then have one list where I make one change, and that is reflected on every other sheet that I use learner names on. Now that comes with its own set of challenges, of course, but it's quite a nice way to do it. So technically what you're doing is you can set up class lists at the beginning of the year. All those class lists are automatically linked together. You ask your teachers to just go and enter the names of the different learners. That gets combined into one master list with ID keys attached, etc. And there you go. Now you've got your actual master list that you can use in your school. So just an idea. Now, once I've done this, I'm faced with a similar kind of issue that I had over here. And that is, I need to have my learner names, my class, my grade added, because this is not giving me enough information. Now, in order to add them, if I right click here, if I go here and I right click and I say insert left, you can do it until you're blue in the face. It will not allow you to insert any information. The reason for that is this formula over here is taking up column A to F. So it wants to print information in this space. And adding a column, just to show you here at the end, there are the two columns that I've added. So I can actually go and, let me just use this as an example, go and delete these columns. And if I go insert one to the left, you'll see it adds it, but the information just jumps back quickly. Insert one to the left and insert one to the left. Now, how do I get around this issue? The easiest way to do that is to actually take your import range and split it into two import ranges. So here I've got my import range. It is imported. It's actually going now to import everything from column A to column F. If I want to have 3 blank columns in between, I'm just going to change this sample data. I'm going to say import everything from column A to column C. And now I've got the first 3 columns. So there they are. Now I could go to my form responses and I can simply go and copy the formulas I've got in those 3, copy that, go to import it, go there and paste it, and there we go. Right, now obviously over here I've only defined a shorter bit, so I'll just have to change that, make sure it's the whole thing. So here I've got that information, but now I'm missing probably the most important part. What were the offenses? Who are the teachers who registered it, etc., etc. So in order to get that part again, all that I need to do, have a look at my import range. I'll copy this formula again, and I'm just going to split it. And I'm going to go there. And now I'm just going to say import then from D to F, D, E, and F. And there I've got my whole data set. Right? Are you still with me? We had a lot more reactions on Wednesday. I'm going to assume it's a Friday. We're all a little bit tired. It's been a long week. And it's not like we are doing easy things today. Great stuff, Ben. Yeah, Francois, I think the issue is it's again, it might be an internet issue. Are other people also experiencing lag in audio and visual, etc.? Okay, I would love to give everyone fiber connectivity so that they can have perfect access at home, but unfortunately, that is well beyond what I can do. Yes, these recordings are incredibly useful. And again, what I've actually done to make things a little bit easier even still is I've taken everything that we did over these 2 sessions and I've broken it up into a series of short connections, of short videos to make things a little bit easier. Right, now just to a different way of envisioning doing this exact same thing. I'm just going to go and take this away. So essentially, just to explain what we've done here again, is I've taken this one set, because I know last time the group struggled a little bit with this. I've taken this A, B, C, D, E, and F, which is now being imported, and I've switched it up. And rather than doing that, I've got one bit that imports all data from A to C. I'll copy that. And not number, sorry. I'm going to copy the formula. And here sorry, I just want to copy the formula. I'll go and I'll add the formula, but this time I'm going to specify, and now it's going to run from D to F. Now, again, you could do the same thing with named ranges, of course. If I went to my other sheet and I said, this is the import data first and import data second, however you want to do it. But now the nice thing is I can actually now insert my columns in between as well, because this is only writing information to the first 3 columns. So now if I go insert to the right, you'll see it actually allows me to do that. And I'm just going to go and copy these things quickly, because if I've already created the formulas, I might as well use them. And we just want to define that to run to the bottom. Okay, so now I've actually, and the nice thing is, if you look at this, now you should start seeing, but this could look a little bit more like what it could look like when this is being used, actively being used, when I've got things like this happening. But we want to do the same thing we did last time. We want to combine the sheets again. So we're going to revisit that trick that we did, how we combine these sheets, because now we want to start doing a few things on those combined sheets. So there is so there's a formula at the bottom, number 8, that you can use. Select that, copy it, create a new little tab for yourself that you call combined. Go there and paste it. Oh, sorry. Do that and enter. And what you should have is you should have the data set that is now being pasted there. There's a couple of things still missing. We actually still want our headers. We want our row numbers. So I'm going to insert one to the left. And I know I'm going quite quickly because this is kind of just recapping things that we did. And we'll go to form responses 1, because we already have the formula. And that's quite one of the cool things if you've got some of these formulas that have already been written. This one, for example, I mean, I know it well enough by now that I tend to just type it out manually, but it's a useful little formula that you can just use on anything that you want to use it on. And there you go. There's the row numbers automatically added. I don't have to go and figure out what else to do there. One thing that's important, because this is something that I do it all the time, which I often forget about this. When you're copying the row headers, select your row headers, copy them, but when you paste them, don't just paste, because we're putting in formulas in our column headers. We're putting it in the column headers. So you don't want to copy those formulas as well. We're going to right click. Going to say paste special, and I will just paste the values only. Right, so there we go, values only. Now it's just a header. I can drag that down, and there we go. There I've actually got my list, my complete data set of combining my imported and my form responses. Now, obviously, when you build your own thing, you're probably not going to have something like imported. You're just going to have form responses, and it's just going to give you lots and lots and lots of different examples. But it's still useful to have this thing because we're running the sort filter on it already. Okay, so we spoke about the sort thing last time. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, because we've got 2 more things that I want to look at, and then maybe a third bonus one if we get time for that. Right, so what I want to look at is how do we use filters on this sheet now. So there are 2 types of filters we can use. there's a quick filter, and then there is a filter view. Now, I'm just zooming out quickly so I can show you where the filter button is. That button over there that looks like a little filter is our filter button. So it really is an incredibly powerful tool to be able to use this filter button when you've got a list of data like this, because this is quite difficult to look at and to kind of figure out anything based on this. Now, obviously, we want to take it even further than this, but getting to this point, before I want to say anything else, is such an important step, because now we actually have this is kind of like your database. Whatever else you want to do is going to be entirely reliant on how you set this up. Now, just very briefly, next week, you're going to be looking at Data Studio, and we're not going to be using a data set like this. Those of you that are going to register for the session, you'll receive an email asking you to fill in a whole bunch of questions on a Google form, etc. And then you'll see how you can use Data Studio to visualize that. But I want you to consider how you could use, when you're in that session, I want you to really consider how you could use Data Studio to take this information and transform it into something meaningful and useful. Now, what I have over here, or what I want to do now, is show you the filter function. So if I select a column, let's say we select column A, or let's go for this offense. We're going to select this offense column. If I click on the filter, create a filter, what it does is it creates what we call a quick filter. Now, the quick filter it's important to note that if anything I apply here, anyone else who's working on the same list will see that same filter having been applied. So from here, once I've got that little green icon over there, I can now create different filters. So I can create a filter here, for example, if I go and say clear and say behavior and select only behavior, it's only going to show me the behavior entries that I have. So I can see immediately this kid's got 3 behavior entries, which is concerning. And obviously I can't read anything into it, and I see all of it's happened in Dr. Seuss's class. So that tells me a little bit more about what is going on for just the behavior in my class. Now, if I want to apply filters if I just want to turn off the filter, I just click on that again, and the green filter icon goes off. And you can play around with this a lot. Now, what's quite cool is if you select multiple columns, and you can actually, quite often when you apply filters, you just select everything. So if I select everything and I press the filter, create filter, you'll see every column now has a little filter icon next to it. So now I can go and get very, very specific on these things. So let's just first filter. I only want to see the class C, right? I want to see class C. So I've selected that filter, and I only want to see the learners in Mr. van Niekerk's class. And there I've got the one learner in Mr. van Niekerk's class. And you can go into even more detail. Now, once I've applied 2 filters, when I apply a second filter, it has already filtered out all of the values here. So I can't actually check that anymore. Now, what I want to show you as well with these filters, because it can become even more powerful than that, we can go and filter, as an example. I don't think this data set really has that, but there are lots of options like filtering by conditions. And here you can say is not empty, is empty, text contains, all sorts of things like that. There are dates. Obviously, if you've got numbers for mark sheets, this is incredibly useful. Being able to filter out all learners that have below a certain mark or more than a certain mark, things like that. So filters are incredibly powerful way of just sorting the information and showing you the parts that you want to see, the parts that are relevant to you. Now, the one thing about these filters is it can be a bit frustrating if you every time have to go and set up a new filter when you want to do essentially the same thing. That's why when you do it you can do exactly the same way as doing that quick filter. But if you click on this arrow next to the filter icon, you can create a new filter view. Now, a filter view is different in that when I click that, you'll see this little gray block that you see that's shown around. Let me just quickly zoom in there a little. The gray block that you see now essentially is an indication that this is a filter view. In other words, whatever I do in this filter view does not affect the other person viewing this same sheet. And while this doesn't seem like an important thing, maybe if you haven't used cloud-based sheets yet, this is really, really important. If I've got 10 people working on the same sheet, you can't all just use filters all the time, because once you apply a filter, everyone else sees that filter. But with filter views, it's different. With a filter view, I see the filter and no one else sees the filter, which is again a great trick that you can do. But what's also great about it, once I go here, let's say we're going to select academic. Now it filters all those learners who have academic offenses, and I'm just going to type in here academic. So I've given my filter a name. Now when I close that and I just want to go to the academic, just want to see the academic offenses, I can just go to my filter view and there it is. Click on that and it applies the filter the way that I've set it up. So it's the filter views is a different way that you can say, look at it, is it saves that information. It doesn't actually, it's great because the filter means that you don't have to go and set it up every single time. And again, it's the same sort of thing. You can apply lots and lots and lots of details to this. I've only got the one column that I've filtered so far, but I can apply, let's say class, we're only going to filter B. So once I've selected that in my filter view and I close my filter view, when I open that academic, it applies both of those things that I've already set up. So such a great way. And for those of you who have personally, I mean, I've used filters in Excel a lot. Filters in Google Sheets are just so much easier when I compare it to filters in Excel. Sometimes it's a very, very quick and easy way to sort through information. And what's, I think the other thing that's great about filter views is that we've got staff members who are more clued up and stronger with ICT backgrounds. So that person can go and set up filter views that the rest of the staff can use, which is obviously a very useful thing to do. Now, the problem is now we're going to share this thing. Everyone's going to have access to it. Everyone's going to view it. Oh, and the other thing I want to say about filters, if you share something with view-only access, everyone can still use filters, which is a great thing. They will automatically go into a filter view and not a filter that's defined for everyone if they've got view-only access. But what happens if you need to give your staff access to a sheet, but you are a little bit worried that someone's going to open it up and they're going to go see, oh, but wait, this is supposed to be C, enter, and then they break everything. And I promise you, the number of times I've seen this happen it's a lot. So we have to limit control, and we have to determine who has access to what and how do we define that. So a simple example here that what we can do is we can say, for example, let's take the name list as something that we want to make editable. So we want our teachers to be able to edit the name list, but we only want them to be able to edit part of the name list. So when you do that, if you've got your tab open here, you can right click on that and say protect sheet. If you open up sheet protection, you'll see there are two ways that you can apply sheet protection. Either this tab, the default one where it says sheet, or this one where it says range. Now, when you say range, what that means is you can select a certain range. So I'd be able to block this off in two ways. I can say sheet protection range. So then I'm going to say, I'm going to select the range. I want this to be my range. So in other words, what that means is I can now determine who can edit column A and B. I'm going to say set permissions. And here, when it gets to this point, I need to choose who can edit it, custom, and I can actually add editors. So if you are 3 or 4 people managing the sheet, you'll add them as editors. They are the only ones who have access to changing the ID keys and the names. So I'll do that. And that means there are protections applied. The other people can come in, they can go and change class and grade as much as they need to, but they can't do anything to the ID keys and the names. But let's say I'm over here on my combined list. I say, no, over here, you can't go and change anything, please. So if you, this part, I'm going to say, that doesn't work like that. We're going to say protect sheet. I'm going to say the whole sheet. So that means they can't do anything on this sheet at all. And you'll see then, if I say the whole sheet, it adds a little padlock icon over here. In other words, you can't edit it. It is visible. You can view it. You can edit anything else over here, but you can't edit that. Now, what happens if you've got, right, so let's see if I can, okay, I don't want to confuse you too much, but let's say we are over here and we only want them to be able to edit the description. That's what's going to happen. We're going to lock everything. We're just going to keep the description open. So here works the same way. We're going to say add sheet or range to the protection. If you don't have that open, just to show you how to get to that again, we go to this little arrow, protect sheet. And we're going to say accept certain cells. So now we're going to say the whole sheet is protected, except for this column. So in other words, this is quite useful in a system like this, because that means the teachers can go in, they can't go in and remove an entry completely, but they can go and edit the descriptions. But you can go in incredibly minute details if you want to. Just an example that I've seen people use, but for me, it feels like a lot of work to do that. But if you've got a staff list and you've got all 20 staff members on that list, but you want to make it editable, but you also know there's a couple of people who like to clown about too much on the staff and they're going to go edit everyone else's things, you can literally go and define that that row is editable only by that teacher. That row is editable by that teacher. That row is editable by that teacher. So you can, that is the level of detail that you can go into, the control that you can go into. But at the same time, remember something that I didn't mention now, all of this also still hinges on the basic share functionality of Google, of any Google file. So you'll still have to make sure that you share it with them appropriately. You can either share it with individuals or you can share the link, or however it is that you want to do the link, that sharing. If that is very foreign to you, please go and have a look at one of our Google Fundamentals courses, because that's really is one of the cornerstones of using the Google ecosystem, is understanding how sharing works and the nitty-gritty details of that. So just to kind of, because I don't think we're going to have, right, the question on can someone delete the sheet by accident? If they've got the viewing, the correct editing rights, then yes, they can delete the sheet by accident. However, one of the great things about Google Sheets, and I promise you this has happened to me on more than one occasion, you've got this version history. So in other words, if I've got this, I can go to the version history, and the version history will show me who did what on my sheet. And if they go and delete a tab and delete a sheet, or whatever the case might be, you can go and restore it. It's easy to restore anything that has been deleted. So here it shows that Jaco van Niekerk did a whole bunch of things today, because while the sheet is brand new, and there's a ton of details that I can go into, and I can go specifically find where the thing is. And if you are not using link sharing, and I know a lot of people use link sharing, and link sharing is easier, of course, but if you are sharing it, if you go to the share panel and you share with individuals, specific people, then you can actually see who did that. So this happened at my previous school where we were using these things, and from time to time the whole thing would break because something is missing, and then I'd open it up, I'd restore it, and I'd see who was the staff member that went and made this mistake. I would go to them, I'd explain to them, please don't do that again, and then it didn't happen again. So there are growing pains when you do these things. Of course, one of the first growing pains you'll see a lot of when you start implementing that is that error that you see over there. People love trying to type in areas when they're not supposed to type. That's why the protection part helps you a lot when it comes to that. There's one last thing that I would like to show you very quickly, because I think it's a pretty useful trick to have. Oh, how do you undo the restrictions? Well, if you've already got them set up, so over here you can see there's my little lock icon. I can see what's happening there. Click on that. If I click on that and I go to protect sheet and I just say cancel, here it shows me all the different protections that I've got, and I can say show all the protections on the sheet, and from there I can go modify any of them that I want to. So I can say this one I'm going to go. I actually want to change this. They should not have access to A, B, to C and D. They should only have access to, or they're supposed to be able to access everything except row A. So yeah, I can go and edit it, and I can change the permissions if I need to add more people in or remove people, or whatever the case might be. So you can also alternatively, if you go to data, you'll see there's the protected. I think yes, where's the protected? Oh, there we go, protected sheets and ranges. So if you click on data, it'll give you, it'll also do that. So there you can change the restrictions. I think I'm gonna stop there because I know we are on an hour and a half. There's obviously an endless amount more that we can discuss. But for me, if I look over the 2 sessions, the key thing in session 1 of the masterclass, we kind of start delving in, specifically start looking at the relation between Google Forms and Google Sheets. How does Google Forms write to Google Sheets? What can you do? I can add columns, I can move columns, but also very importantly, understanding how Google Forms actually writes to Google Sheets. The fact that it inserts a row and doesn't actually write the information to a row. That's an important thing to understand. Today, we looked at specifically how do I make sure that I get the right kind of input in a Google Sheet to building my form to limit the control, and then how we use your ID keys to determine certain things. Another thing that we wanted to, another thing that could be very useful, or that we wanted to get to, is kind of how do we control input inside of the sheet, adding data validation and tick boxes and all sorts of things like that. And I know the other group requested that we might look at some more sessions of this nature, the kind of advanced exploration of what you can do in Google Sheets. But as I said in the beginning of the session, I really want to encourage you to try and find places and ways to use this. Practice makes perfect. If you don't actually try and use these things, you will very quickly forget what we did. But you are also, again, more than welcome. If you start building things and start finding you're getting to a point where you being able to do interesting things, what's the next step? Then you're welcome to contact me and tell me I'm stuck here. I want to get to this point. And if I see too many people contacting me, then I'll say, hang on, we'll do another session and go to some of the more advanced features. For next week's session on Data Studio, it really is a very, very nice session because it opens up this that you see in front of you. This data set that we have, which is essentially a clumsy, difficult thing to read and interpret and understand. But Data Studio takes this and turns it into a visual report of that data set that you can take and really make sense of it. So it's an incredibly, the process of going from a simple Google form all the way to a Data Studio that gives us the information is a very, very nice thing. If I've got a little bit of free time next week, I'm going to use this data and build an example of a Data Studio so that you can see what we could do if you were able to get to this point, how you'd be able to use Data Studio to kind of get so much information. And what for me is really a key thing to this is don't lose out of sight how incredibly straightforward and simple our form was. An ID key, a teacher, an offense, and a description. That's it. And from that, we can get so much information if we plan carefully how our system is going to do all of these things. So with that said, thank you very much, everyone. I hope this was a useful session that you really learned a lot, and that you're able to take some of this. And I really hope that you will able to bring about that systemic change that we're talking about. Because I promise you, having the data, knowing the data, you can do great things. Right, yes, I'll share my email address with you quickly. Right, so there's my email address. Obviously, please try and figure out how to do things on your own. When you get stuck, then you're more than welcome to ask. The recordings for all of these sessions, as well as the resource pack and the whole lot, you will receive that not next week, but the week after that. So then you're going to get all of these things that you can slowly start playing around with it, working with it, and see what you can build with it and see what you can do with it. Again, it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that takes a lot of practice and getting used to it, but the possibilities of what you can do are incredible, and we really have kind of scraped the surface of what you think. Right, it seems so it dropped for a second. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to hang around for another minute or two. If you've got questions, you're welcome to ask those questions. And then I'll try and answer you as far as possible. Yes, have a good weekend, everyone. I hope everyone stays safe, and we get some nice weather coming in this weekend.